April 15th, 1945. The small Bavarian town of Mitterteich lay under a blanket of early spring sunshine, its medieval church spires rising above half-timbered houses that had stood for centuries. American forces had occupied the area just 3 days prior, bringing an end to the conflict in this corner of Germany. Lieutenant James Wilson of the 761st Tank Battalion, part of the segregated African-American unit serving in Europe, surveyed the town square from the steps of the temporary command post, certain that his unit would soon move eastward, leaving this quiet hamlet behind without incident. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. What unfolded in the weeks following would not only challenge deeply held beliefs on both sides, but would demonstrate how human connection could flourish even in the aftermath of the most devastating conflict in modern history. The morning briefing had concluded, and Lieutenant Wilson strode across the cobblestones, his boots echoing in the still quiet square. At 28 years old, James Wilson carried himself with the dignity of a man who had overcome countless obstacles to earn his commission. Born in Philadelphia to a schoolteacher mother and railroad worker father, he had graduated from Howard University with honors before the war changed everything. "Lieutenant Wilson," called Captain Reynolds, hurrying to catch up. "New orders. Headquarters wants a liaison officer to coordinate with the local governance team. The Germans are setting up civilian administration again, and we need someone with a diplomatic touch." Wilson nodded. "Yes, sir. When do I start?" "Immediately. Report to the Rat House, Town Hall, this afternoon. Major Stevens says your German language skills put you at the top of the list." Reynolds handed over a folder. "You'll be working with Sergeant Miller from Civil Affairs. They're expecting you at 1400 hours. Sergeant Thomas Miller proved to be a lanky Minnesotan with a perpetually worried expression. "Glad to have you, Lieutenant," he said, shaking Wilson's hand. "Fair warning, it's been tense. These folks are proud, and defeat sits poorly with them. Most are cooperative, but some, well, you'll see." The Rathaus stood at the north end of the town square, its Renaissance facade weathered but elegant. Inside, the Americans had established a makeshift governance center, where German civilians could register for ration cards, report issues, and begin the long process of rebuilding under occupation. "Our translator left with the 1st Division," Miller explained as they climbed the stairs. "I understand you studied in Berlin before the war?" 1938, Wilson confirmed. "I was there on a research fellowship, left in August when things got too uncomfortable." Miller whistled low. "Lucky timing." "Wasn't luck," Wilson replied. "My professors saw what was coming." The main chamber had been converted into a processing center. Several German civilians waited on benches along the wall, their expressions a mixture of resignation, exhaustion, and poorly concealed resentment. At a desk near the front sat a young woman with ash-blonde hair pulled back in a practical style, meticulously organizing papers. "That's Margaret Keller," Miller said quietly. "She speaks English, worked as a translator for a publishing house before the war, been helping us communicate with the locals. Her brother was some kind of official, now detained, but she seems cooperative enough." When Margaret looked up, Wilson was struck by her clear blue eyes, intelligent and assessing. She appeared to be in her mid-20s, her face showing the strain of recent years, but maintaining a composed dignity. "Fräulein Keller," Miller addressed her, "this is Lieutenant Wilson. He'll be serving as our liaison officer going forward." Her gaze moved to Wilson, and he watched as she processed the sight of a black officer in an American uniform. A flicker of surprise crossed her features, quickly masked by professional courtesy. "Lieutenant," she said in accented but fluent English, inclining her head slightly. "Welcome to Mitterteich." "Thank you," Wilson replied in German. "I understand you've been helping coordinate between military government and local citizens." Surprise registered again, this time at his command of her language. "Yes," she answered in German, "though I'm afraid there is much confusion. People don't know what to expect, what is permitted." "That's why I'm here," he said, "to help establish clear guidelines and address concerns." Over the next several hours, Wilson observed how efficiently Margaret handled each case. An elderly man needing medical supplies, a woman inquiring about missing family members, a farmer requesting permission to access fields now behind military lines. She showed remarkable patience and empathy while maintaining order. As the day wound down, Wilson found himself alone with her as Miller stepped out to deliver reports to headquarters. "Your German is excellent," Margaret noted as she organized the day's paperwork. "Where did you learn to speak so fluently?" "I studied at Berlin University in '38, he said. "Philosophy and economics." Her hands stilled momentarily. "You were in Berlin? During that time?" Wilson nodded. "Until the situation made it impossible to stay." She looked down at her papers. "Many things became impossible then." After a moment she added, "My father was a professor of literature at Munich. He taught me that knowledge transcends borders. He died in 1940. "I'm sorry to hear that," Wilson said sincerely. "Heart failure," she clarified, as though it were important he know her father had died of natural causes, not in the conflict. "My brother Klaus joined the military afterward. He believed it was his duty." A shadow passed over her face. "You mentioned he's being detained." "I don't have specific information," Wilson replied carefully. "Many former military personnel are being processed." She nodded, accepting this non-answer. "I should go. My mother will be worried. Would you like an escort? It's getting dark." Margaret hesitated, then shook her head. "That would not be advisable." "Thank you for the offer, Lieutenant Wilson." As April turned to May, Wilson fell into a routine. Mornings were spent with his unit, afternoons at the Rathaus. He found himself looking forward to the administrative work, particularly the moments when he and Margarete would discuss logistics in German, occasionally slipping into conversations about literature or philosophy when time permitted. "You've read Goethe in the original German?" she asked once, genuine surprise in her voice. "And Kant, though his sentences sometimes run longer than American supply lines," Wilson replied, drawing a small but genuine smile from her. On the 10th day of his assignment, Wilson brought 2 apples from the officers' mess. Fresh fruit was a rarity, and he placed one on Margaret's desk without comment. She stared at it momentarily before murmuring a quiet "Danke." Later that afternoon, an incident disrupted their tentative rapport. A middle-aged German man, seeing Wilson issue instructions to Margaret, began shouting angrily in German, his words laced with racial slurs and indignation that a black man held authority over proper Germans. Before Miller could intervene, Margaret stood and addressed the man in a calm but steel-edged voice. "Herr Becker, this officer is coordinating the distribution of food supplies that your family needs. You will show appropriate respect or leave immediately." The man, startled by her rebuke, fell silent and sullenly took his place in line. Later, when they were alone, Wilson said simply, "Thank you." "No thanks necessary," she replied without looking up. "Ignorance deserves correction." That evening, walking back to his quarters, Wilson found Margaret waiting at a corner near the town square, her expression troubled. "Lieutenant," she said quietly, "may I speak with you privately?" He nodded, and they walked toward a small park where they would not be easily overheard. "My brother Klaus," she began, her voice tight with tension. "I've had no word of him for weeks. Our mother is ill with worry. Can you tell me anything? Where the detention centers are, at least?" Wilson studied her face, seeing genuine concern rather than subterfuge. "The processing centers are near Nuremberg. That's all I know officially." She absorbed this, then squared her shoulders. "I need to know if he's alive. He is all we have left." "What was his role?" Wilson asked carefully. Margaret looked away. "He served as an administrator in local government during the occupation of France, then later in the Eastern Territories." She paused. "He joined the party early. He was committed." Wilson understood the implications. "I can make inquiries, but I can't promise anything." "I understand discretion is required," she said. "I wouldn't ask, but our mother—" "I'll see what I can find out," he promised. 2 days later, Wilson delivered news that Klaus Keller was indeed at a detention center near Nuremberg, awaiting processing and investigation. Margaret's relief was palpable, though Wilson carefully avoided mentioning that her brother's case was being prioritized due to his rank and activities. As May progressed, the dynamics in Mitterteich gradually shifted. The initial shock of defeat gave way to the pragmatic business of survival. Wilson's fair handling of disputes and resource allocation earned him grudging respect from many townspeople, though others remained coldly distant. Margaret began walking home with Wilson some evenings, their routes coincidentally overlapping. During these walks, they spoke not of the war, but of music, literature, and occasionally their lives before everything changed. Wilson learned she had once aspired to be a translator of American literature, that she played piano, that she had visited Paris once as a child. He told her about Philadelphia, about teaching himself jazz trumpet, about his mother's determination that he receive an education, despite all obstacles. "You overcame so much," she observed one evening, "even before the war." "Different kinds of battles," he acknowledged, "but the same determination." On the first day of June, Wilson received word that Klaus Keller would be transferred to Mitterteich for questioning the following week, as investigators had learned he had served as liaison between local government and military units operating in the region. When he informed Margarete, she appeared conflicted rather than relieved. "Will you be involved in his questioning?" she asked. "No," Wilson assured her. "That will be handled by specialized units." She nodded, then said quietly, "My brother is not. He will find it difficult to see me working alongside Americans, especially someone like me," Wilson finished for her. "I'm sorry," she said, genuine regret in her voice. "He has very rigid views." "Most people do," Wilson replied evenly, "until something challenges them." The day before Klaus Keller's scheduled arrival, Wilson was approached by Major Stevens. "Lieutenant, I understand you've developed a good working relationship with the Keller woman." "Yes, sir. She's been invaluable to the civil administration efforts. Her brother arrives tomorrow, former party member, served in an administrative capacity in occupied territories. Intelligence has flagged him as potentially holding valuable information about operations in the East. I want you to observe the initial family reunion. See if anything useful comes up when he's off guard." Wilson maintained his professional demeanor despite his discomfort. "Sir, is that necessary? Ms. Keller has been fully cooperative." "This isn't about her loyalty, Lieutenant. It's about gathering information. This man had access to sensitive operations. If seeing his sister working with Americans, particularly you, provokes an emotional response, he might let something useful slip." Stevens held up a hand to forestall further objection. "That's an order, Wilson. Just observe and report." The next morning, Margaret was noticeably tense as she arranged and rearranged papers at her desk. When the door opened, she looked up expectantly. The man who entered between two military police officers was tall and gaunt, his once immaculate uniform now wrinkled and worn. Klaus Keller had the same blue eyes as his sister, but where hers held warmth, his were cold and assessing. He had been handsome once, Wilson thought, before bitterness and defeat had carved harsh lines around his mouth. "10 minutes, one of the MPs said, stepping back but remaining watchful. "Klaus," Margarete breathed, rushing forward but stopping short of embracing him, uncertain of the protocol. He took her hands briefly, his eyes scanning the room, taking in the American flags, the uniformed personnel, and finally settling on Wilson with visible shock. "What is this?" he asked in German, voice low but intense. "Why are you here working for them?" "I'm helping our people navigate the new regulations," she explained quickly, "making sure everyone gets ration cards, medical care." "Under their control," he cut in, still staring at Wilson, "taking orders from—" "Lieutenant Wilson is the liaison officer," Margaret interrupted. "He speaks German. He studied in Berlin before the war." Klaus's eyes narrowed. "And now he gives orders to German women." "He coordinates civil administration," she corrected. "Klaus, please. Mother is worried sick about you. Are you being treated properly? Do you need anything?" With visible effort, Klaus turned his attention back to his sister. "I am alive. That is all that matters now." He lowered his voice. "Have they searched the house?" "Yes, weeks ago. They took some books, papers from your desk." He nodded slightly. "And Mother?" "Weakened, but holding on. Hoping to see you." "That seems unlikely at present," he said bitterly. From his position across the room, Wilson observed the siblings' interaction with mixed emotions. There was genuine concern between them, but also tension beyond the immediate circumstances. Something in their dynamic suggested long-standing disagreements. When the MPs indicated time was up, Klaus suddenly gripped his sister's arms. "Promise me you'll remember who you are," he said urgently. "What Father taught us about our heritage, our responsibilities. Don't let them," he glanced toward Wilson, "confuse you." "Klaus," she said softly, "I know who I am." After he was escorted out, Margaret remained standing, her back to the room. When she finally turned, her composed expression revealed nothing of her thoughts. "Are you all right?" Wilson asked quietly when they were alone. "Yes," she replied automatically, then reconsidered. "No, I don't know." She met his gaze directly. "He believes I'm betraying something by working here. But what choice do we have now? We must live in this new reality." "Adaptation isn't betrayal," Wilson offered. "Perhaps not," she conceded. "But it feels like walking between worlds, belonging nowhere." The statement resonated with Wilson more than she could know. "I understand that feeling," he said simply. In the weeks that followed, Klaus Keller remained in detention while investigators compiled evidence about his activities. Margaret visited him when permitted, but spoke little about these encounters. Wilson noticed she seemed increasingly withdrawn, often lost in thought. Their evening walks had ceased until one rainy evening in late June, when Wilson found her waiting outside the rat house without an umbrella. "I thought perhaps we might walk together," she said, her voice betraying uncharacteristic uncertainty. "If you're not otherwise engaged." They walked in silence for several minutes, rain drizzling around them before she spoke. "They're transferring Klaus to Nuremberg next week for formal questioning about his activities in Poland." Wilson nodded. "I heard. He was stationed near Łódź. He never spoke of what happened there, but—" She trailed off, then gathered herself. "Lieutenant, James, I need to ask you something directly. What will happen to my brother?" Wilson chose his words carefully. "It depends on what he did, what can be proven, and how he cooperates now. He believes he did his duty," she said softly. "He cannot see beyond that." "Many people felt the same," Wilson acknowledged. "The question is whether that duty included actions now recognized as crimes." She was quiet for so long that Wilson wondered if she would speak again. Finally, she stopped walking and turned to face him. "My brother and I were raised with the same values, the same education. Our father taught us about Goethe, Schiller, Beethoven, the highest expressions of human dignity and spirit. Yet somehow Klaus embraced ideas our father would have found abhorrent." Rain dampened her hair, but she seemed not to notice. "I argued with him, questioned him. Eventually, I stopped speaking of politics entirely. It was easier to pretend, to focus on surviving each day." She looked directly at Wilson. "Was that cowardice? Should I have done more?" "Margaret," Wilson said gently, "survival isn't cowardice, and family is complicated." "Yes," she whispered, "very complicated." Without thinking, Wilson reached out to brush a raindrop from her cheek. She didn't pull away. "I should go," she said after a moment. "Mother will be worried." "May I see you tomorrow?" Wilson asked. "Outside of work, I mean." Surprise flickered across her face, followed by something softer. "Yes," she said simply. "Tomorrow." The next evening they met at a small bridge spanning the creek that ran along the town's eastern edge. The rain had passed, leaving the air fresh and the sunset vibrant. They walked without destination, speaking of inconsequential things until Margaret broached the subject of her brother again. "Klaus asked about you today," she said, "about why an American officer would speak German so well, why a Negro would have studied in Berlin." Wilson raised an eyebrow. "What did you tell him?" "The truth. That you studied philosophy and economics, that you appreciate Goethe, that you've been fair and decent to everyone here." She hesitated. He was not receptive. "I'm not surprised," Wilson said. "His worldview doesn't allow for people like me to be educated, cultured, or in positions of authority." "No," she agreed. "It doesn't." She looked away. There was a time when I might have shared some of those assumptions. Before I knew better. People can change their minds when presented with new evidence, Wilson said. That's the basis of rational thought. Is it really so simple? She asked. No, he admitted. Fear, pride, shame, they all complicate things. Changing your mind means acknowledging you were wrong before, and that's never easy. They had reached a small clearing overlooking the valley. The town lay below them, its church spires catching the last golden light while shadows gathered in the streets. It's beautiful, Margaret said softly. Despite everything. Yes, Wilson agreed, looking not at the town, but at her profile against the sunset. She turned, catching his gaze, and neither looked away. The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken possibilities and equally powerful reservations. James, she said finally, this is impossible. You know that. Many things seemed impossible before, he replied. Worlds change. Not quickly enough. She touched his hand briefly, then withdrew. Not for us. They walked back to town in silence, the space between them charged with awareness. At the corner where their paths diverged, Margarete paused. Will you come tomorrow when I visit Klaus? He has asked to speak with you. Wilson's surprise must have shown on his face. I don't know why, she added. He wouldn't explain. Of course I'll come, Wilson said, though wariness prickled at the back of his neck. The detention center had been established in what was once a school on the outskirts of town. Wilson arrived in full uniform, conscious of the curious looks from both American personnel and German detainees as he followed the guard to the visitation room. Klaus Keller sat ramrod straight at a small table, his sister beside him. When Wilson entered, Klaus stood abruptly, military habit still ingrained despite his circumstances. Lieutenant Wilson, he said in accented but clear English, thank you for coming. Wilson nodded, taking the seat across from them. Your sister said you wanted to speak with me. Klaus glanced at Margaret, then back to Wilson. Yes. I wish to understand something. He leaned forward slightly. My sister tells me you studied in Berlin. That you speak our language, read our literature, understand our culture. Is this true? Yes, Wilson confirmed. Then how... Klaus stopped, visibly struggling with his words. How can you now occupy our country, order our people about? How can you not see the destruction of everything we built? Wilson met the man's gaze steadily. What was built through oppression cannot stand, Mr. Keller. Surely history has taught us that lesson repeatedly. Oppression? Klaus scoffed. We created order from chaos, strength from weakness. Klaus, Margaret interjected softly. Please. Her brother ignored her. You think you understand us because you read some books? You could never truly comprehend what it means to be German, to carry our history, our destiny. I understand humanity, Mr. Keller, Wilson replied evenly. The desire for dignity, for safety, for purpose. Those things transcend nationality, race, all the artificial barriers we create. Klaus laughed harshly. Such American sentimentality. This is why your country will never achieve greatness. You refuse to accept natural hierarchies. Klaus, stop this, Margaret said more firmly. Lieutenant Wilson has treated our people with respect. He has helped families get food, medical care. And you, Klaus turned to her, switching to German, you look at him with such admiration. Have you forgotten everything? What would Father say if he could see you now? Father would say to recognize dignity wherever it appears, she responded in the same language. He would say to judge people by their actions, not abstract categories. Naive, Klaus muttered, then abruptly addressed Wilson again in English. I asked you here for one reason, to request that you find another assistant. My sister should not be working with the occupation forces. It creates difficulties. For our family. Wilson kept his expression neutral despite his surprise. Ms. Keller's role is entirely voluntary. If she wishes to discontinue her service, that is her decision. It is not that simple, Klaus insisted. There are expectations in our community, appearances that must be maintained. Wilson saw Margaret stiffen beside her brother. Are you giving me orders now, Klaus? She asked quietly. After everything, you still believe you know what's best for everyone? Klaus turned to her, lowering his voice. I am trying to protect you. You don't understand how this looks, the rumors already spreading. I don't care about rumors, she replied. You should, he hissed. Your reputation. My reputation, Margaret cut in. What about yours? What about the things people are saying about what happened in Poland, in France? Are those just rumors too? Klaus's face flushed. I did my duty. Nothing more. And now I'm doing mine, she said firmly, helping our people navigate this new reality. The siblings stared at each other, years of unspoken tensions evident in their rigid postures. Finally, Klaus turned back to Wilson. She is naive, he said coldly. She always has been. Reading American novels, dreaming of other places. Reality is harsher than her fantasies. I think Ms. Keller sees reality quite clearly, Wilson responded. Clearer than many. The guards signaled that their time was ending. Klaus stood looking down at his sister. Think carefully about your choices, Margarete, he said in German. Some paths cannot be retraced. After he was escorted out, Margarete remained seated, her hands clasped tightly on the table. I apologize for my brother, she said eventually. He is unchanged by recent events. No apology necessary, Wilson assured her. Family disagreements are universal. She gave him a small, sad smile. Perhaps. But ours seems particularly complicated at the moment. Outside the detention facility, they paused in the June sunshine, neither quite ready to return to their duties. Would you walk with me? Margaret asked suddenly. Not toward town, just away for a while. They followed a path leading into meadows beyond the town limits, wildflowers nodding in the summer breeze. Here, away from watching eyes, Margaret's shoulders relaxed, and she tilted her face toward the sun. I used to walk in these fields as a child, she said, before everything changed. It's beautiful country, Wilson observed. Yes. She was quiet for several steps. James, what my brother said. About rumors. They have already started. People have noticed our conversations, our walks. Does that bother you? He asked directly. She considered this. It should, shouldn't it? That's what I was taught. To care about appearances, propriety, what others think. She plucked a wildflower, twirling it between her fingers. But I find I care less and less about such things. War has a way of clarifying what truly matters, Wilson said. Yes, she agreed. Watching everything you believed permanent crumble around you. It changes perspective. They had reached a small hillock crowned with a single oak tree. Below, Mitterteich sprawled in miniature, its medieval center ringed by newer districts, American vehicles visible on main thoroughfares. My world has become so small, Margaret said, gazing at the town. Before the war, I dreamed of seeing America, translating great works, building bridges between cultures. She looked at him directly. And now here you are, the world coming to me instead. Wilson held her gaze. Sometimes life has its own plans. Very philosophical, Professor Wilson, she said with a small smile. Old habits, he admitted. Philosophy helps make sense of chaos. And what does your philosophy say about this? She gestured vaguely between them. That human connection transcends artificial boundaries, he said simply. That courage is required not just for facing external enemies, but for challenging our own assumptions. Courage, she repeated softly. I wonder if I have enough. Before Wilson could respond, the distant sound of an approaching jeep broke the moment. They watched as it wound along the road toward them, eventually stopping at the base of the hill. Sergeant Miller emerged, shielding his eyes as he looked up at them. Lieutenant Wilson, been looking all over for you, sir. New orders coming in from headquarters. They're pulling units out for redeployment. Meeting at 1600 hours. Wilson acknowledged with a wave. Be right there, Sergeant. As Miller returned to the jeep, Wilson turned to Margaret. I should go. Yes, she agreed, sudden apprehension in her voice. Will you be leaving Mitterteich? I don't know yet, he said honestly. But if orders have changed... She nodded, understanding the implications. Then we should go back. They descended the hill in silence, each absorbed in private thoughts. At the road, Miller waited patiently, averting his eyes from their approach in a gesture of discretion that Wilson appreciated. "I'll see you tomorrow," Wilson said, as Margaret prepared to walk back to town. "Tomorrow," she echoed, her expression unreadable as she turned away. The meeting confirmed Wilson's concerns. The 761st Tank Battalion was being relocated to Nuremberg as part of a larger reorganization of occupation forces. "You've done good work here, Lieutenant," Major Stevens told him afterward. "The Civil Affairs Unit specifically requested you stay on as liaison. It's your choice. Continue here or move with your unit." Wilson was momentarily taken aback by the unexpected option. "How long would the Mitterteich assignment last, sir?" "Indefinite at this point, at least through the summer. We're settling in for the long haul with occupation duties." That evening, Wilson walked alone through the town, weighing his options. His military career would benefit more from staying with his unit. Yet the work in Mitterteich was meaningful, helping rebuild a community from the ashes of conflict. And then there was Margaret, a connection he hadn't sought but couldn't deny. He found himself at the town's small memorial garden, created after the First World War, and now shadowed by the much greater destruction of the Second. An old man sat on a bench nearby, nodding respectfully as Wilson approached. "Good evening, Lieutenant," he said in German. "A beautiful night, is it not?" "Indeed," Wilson replied, surprised by the friendly overture. "I was in America once," the old man continued. "Before the First War, Chicago. I worked in a factory there for 2 years." He studied Wilson's face. "Things were not easy for your people there either, as I recall." Wilson nodded, acknowledging this truth. "No, they weren't. Still aren't, in many ways." "And yet you fight for your country," the man observed. "Interesting, the complexities of loyalty." "Very interesting," Wilson agreed. "I see you walking with Fräulein Keller sometimes," the man said, changing subjects abruptly. "She is a good person. Her father was my friend, a wise man. He would have been grateful for your kindness to his daughter." Wilson watched him carefully. "You knew Professor Keller well?" "Since childhood. We disagreed about many things, especially in later years, but he was a man of principle." The old man sighed. "The son, though, he took a different path. Too much anger, too little wisdom." "Families are complicated," Wilson said, echoing his earlier words to Margaret. "Indeed they are," the old man agreed, rising stiffly from the bench. "But sometimes, Lieutenant, the family we choose matters more than the family we're born to. Something to consider." He tipped his hat slightly. "Good evening to you." Wilson watched him shuffle away, pondering his cryptic parting words. The next morning, Wilson arrived at the Rathaus to find Margaret already at her desk, sorting papers with unusual intensity. "Good morning," he said quietly. She looked up, composure briefly slipping to reveal relief. "You're still here?" "For now," he confirmed. "My unit is being relocated to Nuremberg, but I've been offered the choice to remain as liaison officer." "I see," she said carefully. "And have you decided?" "Not yet." He moved closer, lowering his voice. "Margaret, there are considerations beyond duty that I need to weigh." Understanding dawned in her eyes. "James," the door opened as several American officers entered, ending their private conversation. Throughout the day, they found no opportunity to speak alone, though Wilson caught her watching him when she thought he wouldn't notice. Late in the afternoon, a messenger arrived with news that Klaus Keller was being transferred immediately to Nuremberg for more intensive questioning. Margaret immediately requested permission to see him before his departure, which Wilson granted without hesitation. "I'll accompany you," he offered, concerned by her pale face. At the detention center, Klaus was already being processed for transport. When he saw them enter together, his expression hardened. "So," he said coldly, "you've made your choice clear, sister." "I came to say goodbye, Klaus," Margaret said evenly. "To tell you that Mother and I are well, that we will visit when permitted." Klaus glanced between them, his gaze calculating. "How touching. The American officer escorting you personally. Such special attention." "Lieutenant Wilson approved my request to see you," she replied, tension evident in her voice. "That's all." "Is it?" Klaus challenged. "I see how you look at him, Margaret. Have you forgotten everything? What would father say about his daughter and a Father would say to judge a person by their character, she interrupted firmly, by their actions and principles. Klaus laughed harshly. How convenient your interpretation has become. You twist his words to justify your own desires. No, Klaus, you're the one who twisted everything he taught us about human dignity, about literature and art transcending borders. You took his love of German culture and perverted it into something ugly and exclusionary. The siblings stared at each other, the gulf between them seemingly unbridgeable. Finally, Klaus turned to Wilson. "What are your intentions toward my sister, Lieutenant?" he demanded. "A brief amusement during your occupation duty, a conquest to boast about when you return home." "Klaus!" Margaret exclaimed. Wilson maintained his composure. "My intentions are honorable, Mr. Keller. Beyond that, they are between your sister and myself." "Honorable," Klaus repeated with contempt. "There can be nothing honorable in this. You know that as well as I do. Different worlds, Lieutenant. Incompatible worlds." "The worlds are changing, Mr. Keller," Wilson replied steadily. "Borders redrawn, old certainties questioned. What seemed fixed is now fluid." "Some things never change," Klaus insisted. "Blood, heritage, belonging. You can occupy our country, but you will never be part of it. And Margaret will always be German, whatever foolish notions she entertains now." The guard signaled that time was running short. Klaus turned to his sister one last time. "Margarete, I beg you to think clearly. This man is not one of us, can never be one of us. Whatever happens in the chaos of defeat, eventually order will return. And where will you stand then?" "Perhaps in a better world than the one you tried to create," she answered softly. "Goodbye, Klaus. I'll pray for you." As they left the detention center, Margaret walked quickly, her back straight, giving no outward sign of distress until they were well away from watching eyes. Then she stopped abruptly, pressing a hand against a tree trunk for support. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice strained. "He has always known exactly how to wound." "You have nothing to apologize for," Wilson assured her, maintaining a respectful distance despite his desire to comfort her. "Don't I?" she asked, turning to face him. "My brother became something terrible, James, and I stood by silent, telling myself I was just surviving. But silence is its own kind of compliance, isn't it?" "You can't take responsibility for his choices," Wilson said gently. "Can't I? We grew up in the same house, read the same books, heard the same music. How did he become so filled with hatred while I—" She trailed off. "While you remained open to seeing humanity in everyone," Wilson finished for her. She looked at him directly. Vulnerability and determination mingled in her expression. "Not always. I had my prejudices too, my assumptions. Meeting you challenged them." The honesty of her admission touched him deeply. "We all have blind spots, Margarete. The question is whether we're willing to recognize them when confronted with contradictory evidence." She gave him a small smile. "The philosopher speaks." "Old habits," he admitted. They began walking again, no particular destination in mind, eventually finding themselves at the small bridge where they had met days earlier. The creek burbled below, constant and indifferent to human concerns. "Have you decided," Margaret asked suddenly, "about staying or going with your unit?" "Not yet," Wilson replied. "There are professional considerations, career implications, and personal factors as well." She nodded, understanding the unspoken. "It would be selfish of me to influence your decision, your career, your future. My future is uncertain no matter what," he said honestly. "I'll return to a country that still struggles with seeing me as fully equal. My education, my service, they don't erase the color of my skin in many people's eyes. Then we have that in common," she said quietly, "being seen first for what we are, not who we are." "Perhaps," Wilson acknowledged, "though my challenges will follow me home, while yours are specific to this moment of defeat," she finished. "Yes, I understand the difference." She turned to face him fully. "James, if you stay, what exactly are we doing? Where could this possibly lead?" The directness of her question both surprised and impressed him. "I don't know," he admitted. "I only know that something between us feels genuine in a world where so much has proven false." "Yes," she agreed softly, "it does." They stood together on the bridge as evening settled around them, the future as uncertain as the path of the water flowing beneath their feet. The following day, Wilson submitted his decision to remain in Mitterteich as liaison officer. Major Stevens seemed unsurprised. "Civil Affairs speaks highly of your work, Lieutenant. The transition's going smoother here than in most places." He studied Wilson's face. "Any particular reason you chose to stay behind?" "The work is important, sir," Wilson replied evenly. "These people need stability, clear communication." Stevens nodded slowly. "Just remember, Lieutenant, this is still occupied territory. Personal entanglements can complicate an already complex situation." Wilson maintained his professional demeanor. "Understood, sir." "Good. I'll process the paperwork. You'll officially transfer to Civil Affairs Command next week." Stevens hesitated, then added more personally, "Be careful, Wilson. The war's over, but not everyone accepts that yet." News traveled quickly in the small town. By afternoon, Margaret had heard that Wilson would be staying. She gave no obvious reaction when Miller mentioned it, but Wilson caught the brief smile she couldn't entirely suppress. Later, as they organized distribution plans for the next week's medical supplies, she spoke quietly without looking up from her paperwork. "So you're staying?" "Yes," he confirmed simply. She nodded, still focused on her work. "The town will benefit from the continuity." "I hope so." They continued working in companionable silence until the office emptied for the day. As they gathered their things to leave, Margaret finally met his eyes directly. "Would you like to meet my mother?" The invitation caught Wilson by surprise. "Are you sure that's wise?" "Probably not," she admitted. "But she's asked about you several times." The American officer who speaks German and quotes Goethe. "She's curious." After a pause, she added, "We wouldn't go through town together. There's a path behind the gardens that leads to our street." Wilson understood the necessary discretion. "Then I'd be honored to meet her." The Keller home stood on a quiet street near the edge of town, its once grand facade showing signs of neglect from the war years. Wilson approached from the rear garden path as arranged, finding Margaret waiting at a small gate. "Our neighbors are rarely out at this hour," she explained, leading him through a garden where vegetables had largely replaced the flowers that once grew there. "Still, better to be careful." Inside, the house revealed glimpses of former prosperity, quality furniture now well worn, bookshelves still lined with leather-bound volumes, a piano in the corner covered with a protective cloth. The air carried the scent of herbs and the lingering aroma of soup. "Mother," Margaret called softly, "our guest is here." Frau Keller appeared from the kitchen, drying her hands on an apron. She was a slender woman, with silver-streaked blonde hair pulled back in a simple style, her face showing the same fine bone structure as her daughter. Though clearly weakened by recent years of hardship, she carried herself with dignity. Her eyes widened slightly at the sight of Wilson, but she quickly recovered, extending her hand with old-world formality. "Lieutenant Wilson, my daughter speaks highly of you. Please, come in." Wilson was struck by her composure. "Thank you for inviting me to your home, Frau Keller." "You honor us with your visit," she replied in lightly accented English. "Margaret tells me you studied in Berlin before the unpleasantness. Literature and philosophy?" "Yes, ma'am." "Philosophy primarily, with some economics." "Ah," she nodded. "Then you must have read Kant and Hegel in their original language. My husband, God rest him, was particularly fond of Hegel, though I always preferred the poets myself. Please sit. We have little to offer, but perhaps some tea." The evening unfolded with surprising warmth. Frau Keller revealed herself to be a cultured, thoughtful woman who spoke of pre-war Germany, with both nostalgia and clear-eyed awareness of what had transpired since. She asked Wilson about America, about his family, about his experiences as a student in Berlin, listening with genuine interest to his responses. "You speak of your mother with great admiration," she observed at one point. "She must be a remarkable woman." "She is," Wilson agreed. "She worked as a schoolteacher, while raising 3 children alone after my father passed. Somehow she found money for books, music lessons, even college for each of us." "Mothers will move mountains for their children," Frau Keller said softly, glancing at Margaret. though sometimes we fail them despite our best intentions. "Mother, please," Margaret murmured. "Not tonight." Frau Keller sighed. "No, you're right. We have a guest." She turned back to Wilson. "Forgive an old woman's melancholy. These have been difficult years for families." "No forgiveness needed," Wilson assured her. "Every family has its struggles." "Indeed." She studied him with perceptive eyes. "And what of your future, Lieutenant? When this occupation duty ends? Back to Philadelphia, I assume." "Eventually," he acknowledged, "though much depends on how long American forces remain in Germany." "And your professional ambitions? Margaret mentioned you taught before the war." "Yes, briefly. I hope to return to academia someday, perhaps finish my doctorate." Frau Keller nodded approvingly. "A worthy goal. Knowledge endures when empires fall." She glanced between Wilson and her daughter, a knowing look crossing her face. "Well, I find I'm quite tired this evening. If you'll excuse me, I'll retire early." Despite Margaret's protests that she didn't need to leave, Frau Keller insisted, bidding Wilson a warm good night with a gentle squeeze of his hand. "Please visit again, Lieutenant. It's been refreshing to have an intellectual conversation after so long." After she departed, a momentary awkwardness fell between Wilson and Margaret. "Your mother is not what I expected," he admitted. "What did you expect?" she asked with gentle amusement. "Given your brother's attitudes, I thought perhaps that she would share his views." Margaret shook her head. "Mother was never political. She lived for music, literature, beauty. When things began changing, she retreated into those worlds more deeply." She sighed. Perhaps too deeply. She didn't oppose what was happening directly, but she never embraced it either. "And your father?" "He died before the worst came. Heart failure in 1940, but he was already troubled by what he saw happening. The university purging Jewish professors, books being removed from libraries." She gazed at the bookshelves lining the walls. "He had many Jewish colleagues, friends. He mourned their departures. Yet Klaus took a different path." "Yes." Margaret's expression clouded. "After Father died, Klaus said we needed to embrace the new order to survive, that Father had been naive, too academic, unable to see the practical necessities." She looked down at her hands. "Perhaps if Father had lived, Klaus might have been different, or perhaps not. I don't know anymore." Wilson moved to the piano, gently lifting the protective cloth. "Do you still play?" "Not often," she admitted. "There's been little time or spirit for music. Would you play something now?" She hesitated, then nodded, joining him at the instrument. As she sat and positioned her hands over the keys, Wilson noticed how natural she appeared there, how at home. The melody that emerged was hauntingly beautiful. Schumann's Träumerei, played with the delicate touch of someone who had once practiced for hours each day. Wilson watched her face as she played, seeing how she closed her eyes at certain passages, how completely she surrendered to the music. When the final notes faded, neither spoke immediately, unwilling to break the spell. "Beautiful," Wilson said finally. "Music remembers what we sometimes forget," she replied softly. "That beauty persists even in darkness." "Yes," he agreed, "it does." They sat together at the piano, the distance between them both physical and immeasurable in other ways. Outside, twilight deepened toward night, the sounds of the occupied town growing quieter. "I should go," Wilson said eventually. "It's getting late." "Yes," she agreed, though neither moved immediately. At the garden gate, they paused. The summer night had turned mild, stars appearing in the darkening sky. "Thank you," Margaret said quietly, "for coming, for treating my mother with such respect." "She's a remarkable woman," Wilson replied sincerely, "as is her daughter." She smiled then, a genuine smile unmarred by worry. "Good night, James." "Good night, Margaret." As July unfolded, they established a careful routine. Professionally, they maintained proper decorum during working hours. Lieutenant Wilson and Fräulein Keller coordinated civil administration with efficient courtesy, giving no outward indication of anything beyond professional respect. In the evenings, twice weekly, Wilson would take the back paths to the Keller home, where Frau Keller welcomed him with increasing warmth. They would share simple meals, discuss literature and music, and occasionally listen to Margaret play piano. These evenings became islands of normalcy in the strange transitional period of occupation. On the rare occasions when they were seen together in town, they maintained a careful distance, though observant eyes noted how they sometimes walked on parallel streets, keeping pace with each other while separated by rows of houses. Wilson became aware of whispers, of glances that followed him through town. Some were merely curious, others openly disapproving. Sergeant Miller tactfully reported that there had been talk among both American personnel and townspeople. "Nothing specific, sir," Miller clarified. "Just observations." "Thank you, Sergeant," Wilson replied evenly. "I appreciate your discretion." One evening in mid-July, Wilson arrived at the Keller home to find Margaret alone, her expression troubled. "Mother is resting," she explained. "Her health has been fragile lately. The doctor visited today." "I'm sorry to hear that," Wilson said with genuine concern. "Is there anything she needs? I could arrange for medical supplies." "It's not something supplies can fix," Margaret interrupted gently. "Just age and worry taking their toll. She's concerned about Klaus." Wilson nodded understanding. Klaus Keller remained in detention in Nuremberg, his case progressing slowly through the evaluation process. The preliminary reports Wilson had discreetly accessed indicated Klaus had served in an administrative capacity in occupied Poland, coordinating logistics between civilian administration and military units. The evidence suggested knowledge of, if not direct participation in, operations now being classified as crimes. "Have you had any news?" he asked. Margaret shook her head. "Only that his case continues to be reviewed. Mother writes to him weekly, but his responses are brief." They sat in the garden that evening, the summer air fragrant with herbs and late-blooming flowers. Frau Keller had begun reclaiming the ornamental portions of the garden as food supplies stabilized, small islands of beauty returning amid the practical vegetable plots. "You've never asked me," Margaret said suddenly, "about what Klaus did during the war, what he might be guilty of." Wilson measured his response. "It seemed a private matter, something you would share if you wished to." She nodded slowly. "I appreciate that. The truth is, I don't know exactly. He never spoke of his work in detail, just generalities about bringing order to the Eastern Territories, establishing proper administration." She plucked a leaf from a nearby plant, turning it between her fingers. "I suspected things from his occasional comments, his hardening attitudes, but I never asked directly. Was that cowardice? Self-preservation, perhaps," Wilson suggested. "For you and your mother." "Perhaps." She wasn't convinced, or perhaps I simply didn't want to know to have my suspicions confirmed. They sat quietly for a moment before she continued. "The day you arrived in Mitterteich, when American forces first came, I burned a box of Klaus's papers, letters, documents he had sent home for safekeeping. I didn't read them first. I just destroyed them." She looked at Wilson directly. "Was that wrong?" Wilson considered carefully. "That's a question I can't answer for you." "But what would you have done?" she pressed. "Honestly, I don't know." He met her gaze. "Family loyalty is a powerful force. So is the instinct to protect those we love, even from the consequences of their actions. Even when those actions may have been terrible." "Especially then," Wilson acknowledged. "It's human nature." The quiet between them stretched comfortably, neither feeling the need to fill it with words. Eventually, Margaret spoke again. "I received a letter today. From my cousin in Munich. She's invited Mother and me to stay with her family. She says there might be work for me there, translating for a publisher that's reopening." Wilson felt a sudden tightness in his chest. "That sounds like a good opportunity." "Yes," she agreed. "Munich is recovering faster than smaller towns. There would be better medical care for Mother." "When would you go?" "That's the question, isn't it?" She looked at him directly. "What am I staying for, James? What are we doing?" The directness of her question demanded equal honesty. "I don't know," he admitted. "I only know that when I'm with you, the world makes more sense. Despite everything, our different backgrounds, the current circumstances. Something between us feels right. Yes, she said softly. It does. But feeling right doesn't make it possible, doesn't it? Wilson challenged gently. The world is changing, Margaret. Borders redrawn, old certainties questioned. Some borders aren't on any map, she countered. You know that as well as I do. Before he could respond, they heard Frau Keller calling from inside. Margareta rose immediately. She shouldn't be up. Excuse me. Wilson waited in the garden, listening to the gentle murmur of voices inside. After several minutes, Margaret returned. Mother would like to see you, she said. She's feeling stronger and insists on saying good night properly. Wilson found Frau Keller sitting in a chair by the window, a blanket across her lap despite the summer warmth. She looked frailer than when he'd last seen her, but her eyes remained alert and perceptive. "Lieutenant?" she greeted him, extending her hand. "Forgive me for not joining you earlier." "No forgiveness necessary," he assured her, taking her hand gently. "You should be resting." "There will be time enough for rest later," she said with a small smile. "For now I enjoy company when I can have it." She gestured to a nearby chair. "Will you sit with me a moment?" Wilson complied, aware of Margarete hovering nearby. "Margaret, dear," Frau Keller said, "would you make us some tea? The chamomile might help me sleep." Once they were alone, Frau Keller regarded Wilson with unexpected directness. "You care for my daughter." It wasn't a question, but Wilson answered anyway. "Yes, ma'am, I do." She nodded, unsurprised. "And she for you." "I can see it clearly, though she thinks herself discreet." A sad smile crossed her face. "In another time, another world." "With respect, Frau Keller," Wilson said gently. "Perhaps this is that other world. The old one has been destroyed. A new one is forming." "Perhaps," she allowed. "But building takes longer than destroying, Lieutenant, and people's hearts change slowly, even when their circumstances change overnight." She sighed. "I want my daughter to be happy, to have a future not shadowed by defeat and shame." "As do I," Wilson assured her. "Could she have that future with you?" Frau Keller asked directly. "Not in this temporary bubble of occupation, but in the real world that will follow? In America? In Germany once your forces leave? Have you thought beyond the present moment?" The question struck at the heart of Wilson's own unspoken concerns. "I've begun to," he admitted, "but there are no easy answers." "No," she agreed. "There never are when matters of the heart collide with the realities of the world." She studied his face. "My husband would have liked you, Lieutenant. He believed in the fundamental dignity of all people, a radical notion in recent years, as it turned out." "A notion worth preserving," Wilson said. "Indeed." Frau Keller's expression softened. "Whatever happens, know that you have my respect. In another lifetime, I would have been proud to—" She trailed off, then recovered. "Well, we must deal with the world as it is, not as we might wish it to be." Margaret returned with tea, ending their private conversation. Shortly after, Wilson took his leave, the unfinished thoughts of Frau Keller lingering in his mind as he walked back to his quarters. The following week brought news that Klaus Keller would be transferred back to Mitterteich temporarily, as investigators needed to examine local records that might corroborate or refute his claims about his activities. The American legal team processing his case had requested Wilson's assistance due to his familiarity with both the town administration and the Keller family. When Wilson informed Margaret, she received the news with mixed emotions. "Will I be able to see him?" she asked. "Yes, though officially," Wilson clarified, "and I should tell you. I've been asked to observe your interactions." Her expression clouded. "You're investigating me now?" "No," he assured her quickly. "But your brother's case has drawn attention from higher authorities. His role in the Eastern Territories is of particular interest." "I know nothing of his activities there," Margaret said stiffly. "I believe you," Wilson said, "but others need to be convinced." The day of Klaus's arrival, Margaret appeared at the Rathaus in her best dress, hair carefully arranged, her composure firmly in place. Wilson watched her preparing for the meeting, recognizing the armor of dignity she was assembling. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly, when they had a private moment. "He's my brother," she replied simply. "Whatever he's done, he's still family." The meeting took place in a small room at the temporary military government headquarters. Captain Reynolds and a legal officer named Lieutenant Cohen were present, along with Wilson and a stenographer. When Klaus was brought in, Wilson noted that he looked thinner than before, his formerly immaculate appearance now showing signs of strain. The siblings' greeting was formal, constrained by the official setting and watching eyes. Klaus's gaze flicked briefly to Wilson, a flash of contempt quickly masked. The questioning proceeded methodically. Lieutenant Cohen, a member of the legal team evaluating potential cases for future proceedings, asked about specific dates, locations, and administrative decisions. Klaus answered carefully, his responses technically cooperative while revealing little substantive information. Throughout, Margarete sat quietly, her expression betraying nothing of her thoughts. Only Wilson, who had come to know her subtle expressions, could see the tension in the set of her shoulders, the slight tightness around her eyes. Near the end of the session, Cohen addressed Margaret directly. "Fräulein Keller, did your brother ever discuss his duties in Poland with you or your mother?" "No," she replied steadily. "He wrote that he was working in civil administration, nothing more specific." "Did he ever send documents home? Papers to be held for safekeeping?" Wilson saw the momentary hesitation before Margaret answered. "He sent letters, personal correspondence." "Nothing official? No documents or records?" "No," she said firmly. "Just letters." Klaus watched his sister intently during this exchange, his expression unreadable. When the formal questioning concluded, Captain Reynolds allowed the siblings a few minutes of private conversation, though Wilson remained in the room, observing from a distance. "How is Mother?" Klaus asked, his voice softening for the first time. "Not well," Margaret admitted. "The doctor visits weekly now. She worries about you constantly." Klaus nodded, genuine concern crossing his face. "Tell her I'm being treated correctly, that she shouldn't worry." "I will," Margarete promised. "Klaus," she hesitated. "Is there anything you want to tell me? Anything that might help your case?" He studied her for a long moment. "You've made your allegiances clear, sister," he said eventually. "I understand why, given the circumstances. Self-preservation is a powerful instinct." "This isn't about allegiance," she protested. "It's about truth, about responsibility for what happened." "Responsibility," he repeated with a bitter laugh. "Easy to assign now that we've lost. The victors always write the history, don't they?" His eyes flicked toward Wilson. "And you've chosen your side." "I've chosen humanity," she said quietly. "Something you once understood before I grew up and saw the world as it really is," Klaus finished. "You always were the dreamer, Margaret, father's true daughter." The guard signaled that time was ending. Klaus rose, then suddenly reached for his sister's hand. "The papers you burned," he said in a low voice. "Thank you." Her eyes widened slightly. "You knew?" "I suspected," he admitted. "And now I'm certain. Perhaps you haven't chosen sides so definitively after all." As he was led away, Margaret remained seated, her face pale. Wilson approached only when they were truly alone. "Are you all right?" "No," she said honestly. "I don't think I've been all right for a very long time." That evening, Wilson did not go to the Keller home as planned. The day's events had raised questions he needed to consider carefully, professional responsibilities he couldn't ignore. Instead, he walked the quiet streets of Mitterteich, weighing duty against growing personal feelings. The following morning, Lieutenant Cohen requested a private conversation. "Lieutenant Wilson," he began without preamble, "your relationship with the Keller family has become a topic of interest." Wilson maintained his composure. "In what context, sir?" "In the context of potentially compromised objectivity," Cohen said directly. "There are reports that you've been spending time at the Keller residence, that your relationship with Fräulein Keller may be personal in nature." "I've maintained professional conduct at all times," Wilson stated. "I'm sure you have," Cohen replied, not unkindly. "But perception matters in these situations. The Keller case is becoming significant. Her brother's activities in Poland, potentially connect to larger cases being built. He paused. I need to know if there's anything that might compromise your ability to observe and report objectively. Wilson considered his response carefully. My primary duty has been to facilitate civil administration in Mitterteich. Building trust with local citizens has been part of that mission. Trust is one thing, Lieutenant. Personal involvement is another. Cohen studied him. I'll be direct. Are you romantically involved with Margaret Keller? No, sir, Wilson answered truthfully, though the statement felt like a technicality given the unspoken feelings between them. Cohen seemed partially satisfied. Good. Keep it that way. For both your sakes, he gathered his papers. I'm recommending you be replaced as liaison to the Keller case specifically. You'll maintain your other duties, but another officer will handle future interactions with Klaus Keller. Understood, sir, Wilson acknowledged, recognizing both the professional necessity and the implicit warning. For the next several days, Wilson maintained his distance from the Rathaus when Margareta was working, assigning Sergeant Miller to coordinate with her. He didn't visit the Keller home, though he sent a brief note explaining his absence as due to new assignments. A week passed before they encountered each other directly. Wilson was reviewing supply manifests when Margaret entered the office, stopping short at the sight of him. Lieutenant, she said formally, nodding. Fräulein Keller, he responded in kind, aware of others present. They worked in parallel for over an hour, before finding themselves momentarily alone. My mother has been asking for you, she said quietly. She misses your conversations. I've been assigned other duties, Wilson explained, keeping his voice professional. Because of Klaus's case. He nodded slightly. I see, she said, disappointment evident despite her composed expression. Then perhaps it's best if I accept my cousin's invitation to Munich. Mother could travel once she's stronger. The prospect of her departure created an unexpected hollow feeling in Wilson's chest. If that's what you think is best. Is it? She challenged softly. You've been avoiding me, James. If you've had second thoughts about... Whatever this is between us, I would rather know directly. It's not that, he assured her. But your brother's case has complicated things. There are professional considerations I can't ignore. Of course, she acknowledged. Always the dutiful officer. Margaret, he began, then stopped as Sergeant Miller entered the room. The moment passed, unresolved tension lingering between them. That evening, contrary to his better judgment, Wilson found himself walking the path to the Keller home. He told himself it was to check on Frau Keller's health, a courtesy call that couldn't be misconstrued. But honesty compelled him to acknowledge deeper motivations. Margaret appeared genuinely surprised when she opened the door. James, she said softly, I didn't expect you. I wanted to see how your mother is doing, he explained, and to apologize for my absence. She studied him for a moment before stepping aside. Come in. She'll be pleased to see you. Frau Keller was indeed delighted by his visit, though Wilson noted with concern how much frailer she appeared after just 2 weeks. They spoke of books and music as before, but her energy flagged quickly. You must forgive me, she said eventually. I find I tire easily these days. Of course, Wilson said, rising. I should let you rest. Nonsense, she insisted. You and Margaret should enjoy the evening. The garden is lovely at twilight. Once they were alone in the garden, surrounded by the scent of herbs and late summer flowers, the careful distance they'd maintained crumbled. I've missed this, Margaret admitted. Our conversations, your perspective. As have I, Wilson replied honestly. James, she said after a moment, I need to tell you something about Klaus's papers. You don't need to. I do, she interrupted. For my own conscience. I did burn papers he sent home. But before I did, I looked at them briefly. There were lists, village names, numbers, inventories. She swallowed hard. I didn't read them carefully. I didn't want to know. But I saw enough to understand they documented removal of people, their possessions. She met his eyes directly. I destroyed evidence, James, because he was my brother. Wilson absorbed this, understanding the weight of her confession. We all have limits to what we can face in the moment, he said carefully. Decisions we make under extreme circumstances. Don't make excuses for me, she said firmly. What I did was wrong. I've been living with that knowledge. Why tell me now? Because honesty matters, she replied simply. Because whatever exists between us should be based on truth, not comfortable illusions. In the gathering twilight, her face was partly in shadow, partly illuminated by the last golden light. Wilson was struck by her courage, her integrity, despite the complicated choices she'd made. Margaret, he said softly, I care for you more than I can prudently express. Despite everything, our different worlds, the complexities of our current situation, that remains true. And I for you, she acknowledged. But caring isn't enough, is it? Not against the realities we face. Perhaps it could be, Wilson suggested, with enough courage on both sides. She looked at him questioningly. I've been thinking, he continued. After my service ends, I intend to return to Philadelphia, to resume teaching, perhaps complete my doctorate. It would not be an easy life, but a meaningful one. He paused, gathering his courage. You could come with me, you and your mother. Her eyes widened. To America? James, you can't be serious. I am, he insisted. Your translation skills would be valuable. American publishers are hungry for European perspectives, for skilled linguists. You make it sound so simple, she said, though wonder had crept into her voice. Not simple, he corrected. Difficult, challenging, but possible. And my mother, a frail German woman who doesn't speak English? There are German communities in Philadelphia, and she could learn as you did. She shook her head, though more in amazement than refusal. You've actually considered this? Extensively, he admitted. I've even made preliminary inquiries about sponsoring German nationals for immigration. And my brother? Would you sponsor him as well? She asked, a hint of challenge in her voice. Wilson met her gaze steadily. If he is cleared of wrongdoing, yes. Family matters to you, so it matters to me. She stared at him, searching his face for any sign of insincerity. Finding none, she whispered, You would do that, knowing his views about people like you. People can change, Wilson said simply. When confronted with evidence that contradicts their worldview, you did. Not everyone has that capacity, she warned. True, he acknowledged, but the opportunity should exist, regardless. They stood in the deepening twilight, the possibility he had presented expanding between them, both tantalizing and frightening in its implications. I don't know what to say, Margaret admitted finally. You don't need to say anything now, Wilson assured her. It's just a possibility. Something to consider. The sound of the garden gate opening interrupted them. They turned to see Sergeant Miller approaching rapidly, his expression apologetic but urgent. Lieutenant Wilson, sir. Sorry to intrude, but you're needed immediately at headquarters. Captain Reynolds sent me to find you. What's happened? Wilson asked, immediately alert. Miller glanced uncomfortably at Margarete. It's regarding the detainee, sir. Klaus Keller. There's been an incident. Margaret stepped forward. What kind of incident? Is my brother all right? Ma'am, I don't have details, Miller said apologetically. Just orders to locate the lieutenant urgently. Wilson turned to Margaret. Stay here with your mother. I'll send word as soon as I know anything. She nodded, fear evident in her eyes. Please, whatever has happened, I'll do everything I can, he promised. At headquarters, Wilson found barely controlled chaos. Captain Reynolds looked up from a cluster of officers, his expression grim. Wilson, good. Miller found you. He pulled Wilson aside. There's been an escape attempt. 3 detainees, including Klaus Keller. Were they recaptured? 2 were, Reynolds confirmed. Keller and another made it to the perimeter. There was a confrontation with the guards. Keller was wounded. How seriously? Wilson asked, thinking of Margaret waiting for news. He's in surgery now at the field hospital. That's all I know. Reynolds studied Wilson's face. You were with his sister? Yes, sir, she's concerned, naturally. Reynolds nodded. You can tell her he's receiving medical care. Nothing more until we have a clearer picture. He paused. And Wilson. This situation has drawn attention from division headquarters. General Taylor himself is asking for reports. Everything by the book from here on out, understood? Yes, sir, Wilson confirmed. Through a long night of waiting, Wilson coordinated between the military authorities and the Keller family. Klaus survived surgery but remained unconscious, his condition listed as serious but stable. Margaret was permitted a brief visit under guard, returning white-faced but composed. They say he may recover, she told Wilson quietly, if infection doesn't set in. The doctors here are excellent, Wilson assured her. He'll receive the best care possible. She nodded, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. I should return to Mother, she's distraught. Let me arrange transportation, Wilson offered. In the jeep driving back to the Keller home, Margareta suddenly asked, Was what you said earlier about America, about sponsoring us, was that real or just a momentary fancy? Wilson glanced at her, surprised by the question amid the current crisis. It was real. It still is. She nodded, seemingly satisfied, and said nothing more. 3 days later, Klaus Keller regained consciousness. The official report indicated he had participated in a planned escape attempt that had been betrayed by another detainee. When confronted by guards at the perimeter fence, he had allegedly reached for a weapon, resulting in him being wounded. When Margaret was permitted to visit again, Wilson accompanied her officially, standing back as she approached her brother's bedside. You're alive, she said simply. Mother will be relieved. Klaus managed a weak smile. Disappointed the Americans, I suppose. Don't, she chided gently. They saved your life. He glanced past her to where Wilson stood. Always present, your American shadow. Lieutenant Wilson has been very helpful during this difficult time, she said evenly. Klaus studied her face. You've changed, sister, I see it clearly now. Perhaps I have, she acknowledged. Or perhaps I've simply found the courage to be who I always was. Their conversation continued quietly, Wilson unable to hear the exchange, but observing the subtle shift in their dynamic. Where tension and opposition had dominated before, he now sensed a fragile acceptance, if not agreement. As the visit concluded, Klaus beckoned Wilson closer. Surprised, Wilson approached the bedside. Lieutenant, Klaus said formally, I understand I owe you my gratitude for assisting my sister during this situation. No gratitude necessary, Wilson replied. It was the right thing to do. Klaus studied him, genuine curiosity replacing his usual contempt. You actually believe that, don't you? Doing right for its own sake. I do, Wilson confirmed. Interesting, Klaus murmured. In your position, with your background, I would have expected bitterness, resentment. Those emotions exist, Wilson acknowledged, but they don't define me or my actions. Klaus considered this. My sister seems to hold you in high regard. Wilson glanced at Margaret, who watched this exchange with barely concealed amazement. The feeling is mutual, he said simply. A ghost of a smile touched Klaus's face. Perhaps I've underestimated you, Lieutenant, among other things. In the corridor outside, Margaret touched Wilson's arm. What was that? She asked, bewildered. I've never seen him so reflective. Near-death experiences can change perspectives, Wilson suggested. Or perhaps he's finally confronting realities he's long denied. Perhaps, she agreed, though doubt lingered in her voice. The following weeks brought unexpected developments. Klaus Keller, recovering from his wounds, began cooperating more fully with investigators. While not admitting direct culpability, he provided information about operations in the Eastern Territories that proved valuable to ongoing cases against higher-ranking officials. In exchange for this cooperation, authorities agreed to classify him as a lesser case, potentially eligible for earlier release once formal proceedings were established. The wounded escape attempt was not pursued as an additional charge, as evidence suggested he may have been coerced by the other prisoners. Throughout this period, Wilson maintained professional distance during working hours while resuming his evening visits to the Keller home. Frau Keller's health continued to decline, though her spirits brightened considerably when informed of the improved outlook for her son's case. One evening in late August, as Wilson and Margareta sat in the garden, she broached the subject that had remained unaddressed since his unexpected proposal. "I've been thinking about what you said," she began carefully. "About America, about possibilities." Wilson waited, giving her space to continue. "I spoke with Mother about it," she continued. "I was certain she would refuse, would be horrified at the very idea, but she surprised me." Margaret smiled slightly. "She asked if there were good orchestras in Philadelphia." Hope kindled in Wilson's chest. "And what do you think, now that you've had time to consider?" She looked at him directly. "I think it's still impossible in many ways, that we would face prejudice from all sides, that it would be the hardest path possible." She reached for his hand. "And yet the only one I can imagine taking now." Wilson's heart soared, though he maintained his pragmatic approach. "It wouldn't be easy," he cautioned. "My world has its own deep-seated prejudices." "As does mine," she acknowledged. "Perhaps that gives us common ground." They sat together as twilight deepened around them, hands intertwined, the future uncertain, but suddenly filled with possibility. 2 days later, Wilson received orders that his tour of duty would end in October. He would return to Philadelphia, honorably discharged, free to resume civilian life. The timing seemed providential, enough to begin immigration paperwork for Margaret and her mother to make arrangements for their future. When he shared this news with Margaret, she received it with mixed emotions. "So soon," she murmured. "I thought we would have more time." "Time for what?" he asked gently. She gestured vaguely. "To be certain, to be sure this isn't just a moment out of time, a connection that only exists here in these unusual circumstances." "Some things transcend circumstances," Wilson said. "What I feel for you began here, but isn't bounded by here." She studied his face. "You're certain?" In response, Wilson reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. "I had this made by a silversmith in Nuremberg," he explained, opening it to reveal a simple but elegant ring. "It's not much, not what you deserve, but—" "James," she interrupted, eyes wide. "Margaret Keller," he said formally, "I am asking you to marry me, to come to America as my wife, to build a new life together, whatever challenges that might entail." She stared at the ring, then at him, emotions playing across her face too rapidly to identify. "You know what you're asking? What it would mean for both of us?" "I do," he assured her. "Then yes," she said simply. "Yes, I will marry you." The next day, Wilson requested a meeting with Klaus Keller. Though still technically a detainee, Klaus had been granted additional privileges due to his cooperation and recovering health. They met in a small office at the hospital rather than the detention center without guards present. "Lieutenant Wilson," Klaus greeted him, curiosity evident in his expression. "This is unexpected." "Thank you for agreeing to see me," Wilson said formally. "I'm not in a position to refuse much these days," Klaus observed dryly. "What can I do for you?" Wilson took a deep breath. "Out of respect for your family, I wanted to inform you directly. I have asked your sister to marry me, and she has accepted." Klaus's eyebrows rose, genuine surprise replacing his usual controlled expression. "I see," he said finally. "And you're telling me this as, what, a courtesy?" "As recognition of your importance in her life," Wilson corrected. "Despite your differences, she values family greatly, as do I." Klaus studied him with newfound intensity. "You intend to take her to America?" "Yes, and your mother as well, health permitting." "I see," Klaus repeated, processing this information. "And what do you expect from me, blessing, objection?" "Neither," Wilson said honestly. "Just awareness. The choice is hers to make." Klaus was silent for a long moment. "You surprise me, Lieutenant," he said eventually. "Coming here facing me directly, it shows character." He leaned back in his chair. "My sister has always had excellent judgment about people, better than mine, clearly." "Then you don't object?" Wilson asked, unable to keep surprise from his voice. A complex expression crossed Klaus's face. "Would it matter if I did?" "To Margaret, yes," Wilson acknowledged. "She would proceed regardless, I believe. But your opposition would cause her pain." Klaus nodded slowly. "And you wish to spare her that pain?" It wasn't a question. He sighed deeply. The world has changed, Lieutenant Wilson. Everything I believed, everything I fought for, it's ashes now. Perhaps it's time to acknowledge that reality. He extended his hand across the table. You have my sister's happiness in your keeping now. I trust you understand the magnitude of that responsibility. Wilson shook the offered hand, recognizing the significance of the gesture from a man like Klaus Keller. I do, he assured him. Completely. 1 week later, with special permission from military authorities and in the presence of Frau Keller, Captain Reynolds, Sergeant Miller, and, to everyone's astonishment, Klaus Keller under guard, Lieutenant James Wilson married Margaret Keller in the garden of the family home. The ceremony was simple, conducted by an army chaplain who had initially balked at officiating until Captain Reynolds made it clear this was not a request. As they exchanged vows in the late summer sunshine, Wilson looked into Margaret's eyes and saw not just love but courage, the courage to step into an uncertain future, to challenge conventions on both sides of the ocean, to believe that connection could transcend the artificial boundaries that had divided humanity for too long. I now pronounce you husband and wife, the chaplain declared, official duty complete, despite his evident discomfort. As they shared their first kiss as a married couple, Wilson was conscious of Klaus watching them, his expression unreadable but no longer hostile, of Captain Reynolds standing at attention, officially recognizing a union that would have been impossible months earlier, of Frau Keller wiping tears from her eyes, a mixture of joy and apprehension for her daughter's future. The world was indeed changing. Not quickly enough, perhaps, not completely, but changing nonetheless. And in that moment, in a garden in occupied Germany, a small piece of a better future took root, one where understanding might eventually overcome prejudice, where human connection might prove stronger than the forces that sought to divide. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.